All right, so we're just back from Scotland. You've reignited your love of powerlifting. How was the entire experience for you? Just give it to me.
Yeah, so it was exactly what I wanted out of it. Like when I think about Last Chance, like, yeah, obviously I'm sad I didn't reach my goal. But the thing that disappointed me the most about Last Chance was the fact that I had an absolutely miserable time on the day. And at the end of the day, like, yeah, you want to push yourself, you want to reach your goals. But ultimately, we're all doing this hobby for fun. And if I had reached my goal, if you gave me the choice and you're like, you could reach your goal and you could have a miserable day, or you could not reach your goal and you could have the best day of your life. I mean, obviously the person who's like very goal oriented in me would be tempted to pick reaching the goal. But I know like what would give me a good life is having the great day and not reaching the goal. And I feel like in a way, Scotland kind of like embodied that for me, because I actually didn't reach a lot of my goals. I did reach some of them, but I was so happy with how I felt at every point during prep. I was so happy at how I felt during every warm up on the day, during every lift on the platform. Like, I made it my mission to savor each and every lift for what it was, whether it was a day that I hadn't slept and I was feeling like absolute dog shit, but just like not being like, oh God, well, I had to hit like this number that we said today. I can take it down 5 kilos and just take the lift for what it is and just appreciate that it's a privilege to have a heavy weight on my back and to be in the position to be able to get after it and to push myself, because some people don't have that. So that was what Scotland was meant to be for me, and that's exactly what it was. Like, I just rolled with the punches 100%. It was a super interesting experience to go abroad and compete. Like, it gives you a totally different set of challenges to contend with as an athlete, like not sleeping in your own bed, traveling, overworking to get all your shit done before you like go abroad, being in a gym that you've never even set foot in before, being on equipment that you've never touched before. That was definitely something where I was actually glad for the fact that I train in a commercial gym, because like I train on different equipment all the time and I'm like, oh, new bar, who dis? Not phased by it in the slightest, but it was interesting because I've never had that experience at a comp. Usually, like if there's an ER rack on the platform, there'll be an ER rack backstage, and you know how you're going to feel, like you know where you're going to be putting your feet and all that jazz. Whereas in Scotland, like we were on a monolift to warm up.
Right, yeah.
I never even used a monolift in my life before, and I was like, okay, it is what it is. Let's go. And I was just so focused on being 100% in the moment for every warm up. Like, just feel the brace, like make it the best brace I can, like enjoy it. And I think because of having that mindset, no matter what the outcome was on the day, I was satisfied with it.
I think it's important to note that you took the challenge of Scotland with a relatively quick turnaround. Like, you went from in like mid-February, you weren't going to compete for the foreseeable, to like, I think the first or second week of March, you're like, oh, by the way, I'm doing Scotland now.
Yeah.
And you were in the middle of a weight cut, I believe.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, flying international, staying in a bed that's not yours, competing in a gym you've never competed in before, and getting your first chance at a monolift on a competition where you weren't even lifting on a monolift. Yeah, you're 100% right. The gym was obviously really small. OBS gym is fucking savage, but it's probably a pretty unique experience versus lifting at like abs powerlifting.
Yeah, for sure. Like I was not expecting to compete again until November, which definitely like would have been a terrible idea. I think that would have just repeated everything that made Last Chance like a bad prep for me. Like having like 7 to 8 months to like just be in my head and stress about whether or not I was going to reach my goals. Like, I feel like waiting until November would have been that times 10, because I had so much baggage from the last comp. And I think just like deciding, okay, like, no, we're just going to like get on the platform. And with how low my confidence was at that point, to have simply being on the platform and like giving it my best shot, have that be the goal. I think that's something I always try and like, I guess, instill in clients when they're struggling, is just bring the bar down and give yourself the ability to like get a win in the bag, and then start to build up your self-efficacy again. But yeah, speaking of clients, like that was one thing that I really struggle with. I don't know if you can empathize with this as a coach yourself, but when you're struggling as a coach and then you're trying to like coach your clients through something that, you know, similar, something where you might have a lot more imposter syndrome because of that struggle, that can be really tough. Like I was getting like a lot more people coming on board with me as a lifter. And at the time, I myself was really I was struggling with my relationship with powerlifting. Like I was struggling to visualize myself enjoying competing again. And meanwhile, I'm like, yeah, come do powerlifting. It's so fun. You're going to gain so much confidence. And my confidence was at a rock bottom. I don't know if you've ever had an experience like that.
I have definitely had meets that went pretty badly. I think what probably plays to my advantage is 10 years worth of pro wrestling experience where you can go out and have some absolute stinkers and the audience literally boo you.
Oh God.
So you kind of have to get comfortable pretty quick.
Yeah.
I suppose this is probably one piece of like resilience I'm lucky enough to have is that like I've never been shaken by a bad performance. I've never thought, like, I'm usually self-aware enough to see what I could have done better or the circumstances around it. But I would also hasten to add that I think coming into Last Chance, you had pretty hefty expectations on yourself.
Yeah.
And I think firstly, I think of, James O'Brien. He's an abs coach. He has his own thing now called Leviathan Method. He's a very, very good powerlifting coach, very rarely competes, and won't mind me saying, if he does listen, is that he's not a particularly competitive powerlifter. So I don't think it's necessary to be somebody who absolutely adores competing to be a great coach. And I've definitely seen you've amassed this like your own little crew of powerlifters. And I love that because I love the more people we have in, I think the better it gets. I think the more people doing it, the better. So whatever entryway they have in, fantastic. But I can imagine just even for yourself, I'd imagine that was a massive, like, I don't want to say like identity crisis, but you went from really, really projecting this excellent performance and achieving all these great things in a pretty young powerlifting career to not even knowing if you wanted to compete again. So I think that's a tough, probably a big like crisis of like coach identity even.
Yeah, it was a crisis of identity. Like that's exactly what I was thinking of it as at the time. Because for me, as a coach, what I want to get out of my athletes isn't necessarily like the biggest total they could potentially get for their genetic potential. What I want is like a transformation of character. And I think that that's why it hits out. Because actually, objectively, Last Chance wasn't even a bad performance. Like I got like a 7.5 kg squat PB. I got like a 10 kg bench PB. And deadlift went to shit, but we'll talk about that later. But like I'd had PRs during prep for deadlift. And I had total PR. Technically, it was not like a terrible performance, but it was terrible relative to the ridiculously high expectations I'd set for myself. And it was terrible in terms of the experience of competing. And because what I want to deliver for my athletes is a really positive experience of competing, I think that that's why it crushed me so much. But yeah, in terms of the goals, I think that was, I suppose whenever you're having these struggles, like I just try and remind myself, like, if you don't go through this, you'll never learn what it is to be at the receiving end of this, and you will never be able to help a client properly when they're going through this themselves. And setting high expectations and falling short of them is an inherent part of trying to push yourself in any faculty, in any walk of life, right?
Any realm,
in any realm. So I think that by experiencing that, like it's a hard one it's a hard line to toe, right? Because you don't want to not set goals. You need to set goals in order to push yourself and in order to like try and get to a new standard, and to get more out of it for yourself. But at the same time, it's what is your relationship to these goals? That is the key question. And that's the thing that you constantly have to revisit with yourself and with your athletes, in my opinion. It's something that now that I have clients coming up to their second competition and even one who's coming up to her third competition, and their expectations are starting to rise, I am really like noticing the importance of navigating this as a coach. And I am so immensely grateful for the negative experience I had at Last Chance and the ability I had at Ab Scotland to bounce back from that, because it's put me in the position to be actually able to talk to them about this. I think it's not the problem of having a big goal. It's what is the narrative that you're telling yourself about the world in which you don't reach that goal. Have you hinged your sense of self and your sense of self-worth on whether or not you reach this, and why? What's the rush, you know?
Yeah, I think because most powerlifters will say it's a long game. It's a very common expression. Like I think of lifters like Noel Whelan, who lifts for Abs Powerlifting. He's been lifting probably for about 10 years. And it's only this year at the most recent Dublin-based Ab Series 12, that he finally achieved the goal of breaking 500 dots. I think that was his fourth attempt at doing it. And he kept missing it on his last deadlift. Like, the ability to stay through that amount of essentially what must have been a very serious amount of self-defeat is huge. Because he said, this is my going in, 500 dots, 500 dots, 500 dots at like 4 or 5 different competitions. And it's just now he just got it, which is huge.
Huge. And the thing about that is, right, if powerlifting was just like, I set a goal and I reached the goal because everything's fully predictable, then it wouldn't build resilience.
No, yeah, sure.
Resilience is like facing adversity, facing failure, and still coming back and continuing to push. So that's something I always kind of remind myself and also my clients when they are feeling disappointed or they're feeling like they're falling short of the goal we set, is like, if all of this was like, we have our like post-comp call and we're like, hey, what do you want next? And then I was able to magically predict the exact workload that would definitely allow them to reach their goal. And then they just went and they ticked off those boxes and then they arrived on the day and everything went smooth and according to plan and they reached that. What would be the point?
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. So Last Chance 2022 was your third competition.
Yes.
On your first meet, which was Last Chance 2021, and then you did an ab series somewhere in there as well. Did you have expectations going into those meets? Or I assume the first one was just to go have a good time?
Yeah, first one was just have a good time.
Second one was probably just to like improve on previous performance.
No, I actually said, I think this is probably where I got the notions from early on. I set a not a huge goal, but a reasonably big goal for the second one. I wanted Div 1 and I got it. I got it by a hair and it was so satisfying. It was fantastic. It was like, you know, it was one of those ones where like I was within shooting range, but it was still a fight. Like I was at 333 dots, I think, at the end of, for Last Chance 2021. And I think that back then it was still 350 dots to qualify for Div 1. So I had 17 dots to make up in 12 weeks. So that was very doable for somebody who's like coming up to their second comp. But it was still a tough challenge, a good push.
Absolutely,
and I got so much out of pushing myself for that. And I had a really positive prep. It was short because it was 12 weeks. I didn't have time to overthink. I was like filled with confidence from having had a successful first meet where I went 8 for 9. I hit pretty much like all of my goals for, we set goals for numbers for the first one. Obviously there was some wiggle room there, but like I reached that, happy out. And then I was like, okay, what's next? Like I'm a very naturally ambitious person. I love to have a goal. Like if I don't have a goal, I just feel absolutely lost. So I was like, what's the next goal that feels tangible? And at the time I was like, well, what about qualifying for nationals? I don't know. I love to just poke around, like look at numbers and hypotheticals and stuff like that. That's like my favorite thing to do. They call me spreadsheet lady at work. But so
stats. Give me the stats.
Give me the stats. Genuinely my idea of a good time. But yeah, so I had a poke around and I was like, okay, like I think that maybe like if I had like a really good run of it coming up to December, I could qualify for nationals. And like it actually wasn't outside the realm of possibility, like if everything went according to plan, because we were also planning to go up a weight class. At abs I was walking around at like 70 kilo. I actually weighed in at like 67.7 or something like that after the weight cut for abs, just a little bit of weight manipulation, but I was pretty lean at 70 kilo. So we were kind of like after abs we were like talking about like what needs improvement, and we both said my arms are pretty long. I need a bit more muscle if I was going to improve my bench, and that I was lean enough as I was. So we decided, let's try and fill out the under 76s, which was a big challenge for me psychologically. And we talked about that like a lot during our last podcast. So we anticipated we were going to have that on our side, like a lot of extra tissue being built. And we initially thought that the total I was going to have to hit was 365. We actually slightly miscalculated it. And I think for abs I had hit 342.5. So you're talking about adding like 22.5 kilo to my total.
A good bit anyway,
It's a good bit, but it was also going to be like a 7-month prep and I'd be going up a weight class. So while it was a stretch, it was not outside the realm of possibility given my rate of progression at that time. But I think going back, it's not that I wouldn't have set that goal. It's that I would have been so much more cautious about what I was hinging on that goal. And I could feel like already that like I felt this like immense pressure, like, oh, like people are going to think she has notions that she's like only doing her third comp and she's already trying to do this. But I was like, I just want to do this for me. But somewhere along the way, it went from being like, I just want to do this to push myself to like, I have to do this or I'm a failure.
Right.
And I think as I got deeper into the prep and as I started to struggle with the bulk more, not for psychological reasons as I'd anticipated, but actually for physical reasons, because my body very much does not like to go over 71 kilo. Like bad things start to happen. And yeah, so that started to slow down, become much more of a struggle than I anticipated. And then about halfway through, we realized we'd actually miscalculated the total. And I was already feeling like stretched to hit that 365, and to find out that I was actually 375 minimum that I was going to have to hit.
And 10 kilos is a lot extra, yeah.
A lot extra when you're already feeling like very unsure about your abilities to hit that. And instead of at that point, like I was trying to tell myself like, oh, it's just fine, just do your best. But it wasn't like in a genuine way. It was nearly like a nihilism. It was like, I just have to see this through because I've started. But my heart was not in it towards the end of that prep. Like there was stuff going on in like my family life as well that was like quite draining at the time. So when that got added into the mix and some ill health as well, like it really started to compound. And I think because I had not focused on enjoyment for that prep, I'd been so focused on the number. And I didn't even know how to start to focus on enjoyment because I detached myself so much from that.
Let me just ask one question on that. Do you think because of everything that was going on external to the gym that it became this thing that, well, if I can just go and box off my train and hit the numbers and keep working towards this thing, you could almost like externalize all the other stresses because you could just really, really focus in on something like that. Well, if I keep pushing hard, I'm going to qualify for nationals, I'm going to smash this comp, almost as a coping mechanism.
Yes, goals have always been that for me. And I think they are for a lot of people a way of giving themselves a sense of control. And I think that that's something I've become a lot more mature about in the last, I don't know how many months it's been, 5 months or so, that like you're not 100% in control and no amount of hard work is going to give you 100% control.
Very true.
So it's not that you shouldn't be using your goals in the gym as a means of relief from the stresses of life, but there's a big difference between using it as a way to blow off steam and to give yourself some mental space and to give yourself some confidence versus trying to fool yourself into thinking that there is a arena of your life where you are judge, jury, and executioner and 100% like God in control. Like that's just not how life is. Life is chaotic. And sometimes you can put in all of the work and get none of the reward. And you just have to be okay with that.
Yeah, it's a tough challenge for people. I think especially like, because think about it, you started powerlifting end of 2021, really nice amount of progress between Comp 1 and Comp 2. And then there was obviously enough time between Comp 2 and 3 to project this massive outcome. And as you mentioned already, you did actually have a pretty decent day barring your deadlifts. But I think, as you mentioned, it was just the experience of the day as a whole. I'd imagine you had this image of what way the venue was going to be, the warm-up room, the crowd, the way it was going to feel to lift. I know we've talked and you were talking about there was just like, particularly for your deadlifts, just no hype. There was just nothing there. Now, I think people listen, and this is not a detriment to the people there. December was fucking freezing cold. And I think, like, I remember because I also competed at Last Chance, I remember I was going around a dressing gown and every time I had to lift, I'd go and put on my belt and my belt was fucking freezing. So my teeth would literally start chattering. That's how awful it was. So I can kind of understand. But yeah, I think particularly coming off the back of lifting at an ab series, which is just mayhem when you're out there, it's brilliant, to a really, really cold IPF Open in December, which was a 2-platform meet as well. So it was just hectic and all over the place. I think it definitely probably fell short of what you were probably hoping for yourself, if I'm right in saying that.
100%. Like the atmosphere that I need as a lifter to perform my best, and I like kind of expected, because Last Chance the year before was pretty hypey as far as I remember. But I think that might have just been because Kane was behind me. He was the back spotter. Yeah. And Kane is like so enthusiastic. And I actually knew him from before, like from training in Herc. So I felt like even though it wasn't open to the public in 2021, I felt like I had so much support on the platform. Like I also didn't know any better. It was my first comp, so I had no expectations. Whereas at Abs Series 9, like the support was absolutely unbelievable. I had friends there. I could hear my friends in the crowd, because at an ab series, it's kind of like contagious if one person starts yelling because of the chaotic atmosphere, because it lends itself to people letting loose. If your friends start yelling, the crowd will actually start yelling for you as a whole. The platform were yelling for me. I just felt so like supported at that competition. And at Last Chance, because I know a lot of people had said like Last Chance was a particularly like low hype competition.
Very subdued.
It's very subdued. And because of the cold, so it's not to say, oh, like boohoo, poor me or anything. I feel like it was like this for a lot of people. I was just very, very taken off guard by how like quiet and alone it was on the platform. Like I felt totally alone on the platform. I actually had 5 people there who had come specifically to support me, and they told me that they were yelling for me, but because they were like further back and there isn't that kind of like contagiousness of enthusiasm in the crowd, partly because of the atmosphere, partly because of the cold, of course, I just felt like it was just me and only me out there. And I also, the atmosphere is generally like less chaotic. Like the way I describe abs serious competitions to people who've never been at them is like it's nearly like being at like a music festival, but it's a powerlifting music festival. It's utter chaos. It's like hard. Like the beast will be unleashed if the beast is there to be unleashed if you're at an abs series. And I was really relying on like, especially because I'd been feeling like not myself during the prep. I was just expecting when I got there on the day, I would just switch on by virtue of being there because that's always how it had been for me. But I was there on the day and I was like, still feeling nothing, still feeling total and utter ambivalence towards this experience. Anytime now I'll start feeling like some amount of helpful anxiety, because before, up until that point, I'd been trying to control my anxiety, whereas now I was like, anxiety, where are you? Like anytime now, this would be great if I could feel as though I'm actually about to lift. And even up until like up before my lifts, I was feeling nothing. Like I have to work so hard to get myself in the zone for a squat. I'd be like, Richeal, like this weight could kill you. I'm still like having a nap, like psychologically having a nap. And I managed to just about switch into it. Like I literally paused at the bottom of my first squat because I was so asleep. I was just, obviously the not being on my medication.
Richeal's training on the fucking platform.
Literally not even training. Richeal having her 8 hours sleep on the platform, more like it.
Sorry, you were mentioning you and I, just to cut ahead a little bit here. So the IrishPF is a subsidiary of the IPF, and they operate under WADA testing, and they have a banned substance list. But some of the substances are allowed use for therapeutic use under a TUE, which you found out very late in the prep that you might have to apply for. And rather than doing that, if I'm right in saying you played it safe and didn't take prescribed medications so you could lift without being stung as a cheat.
Yeah, so pretty much like, so I have ADHD, I take ADHD medication, and the way that my ADHD affects me as a lifter is, first of all, my nervous system is just generally pretty slow. Like my coordination is really slow. Like when I said I paused at the bottom of the squat, like part of that was because I wasn't on my meds and I'm not used to like not lifting on my meds. So by the time I got down to the bottom of the squat, it took me like an extra second than it usually would to register, I am now at the bottom of the squat and I must start to go back up again. And it affects my coordination. On the day at Last Chance, I kept like bumping into everything. I had like loads of bruises on my legs just from like busy warm-up room, just walking into everything. Like I've always been like that since I was a kid. Like the medication helps me not be like that. Another thing that I really struggle with if I'm not taking it is like concentrating on multiple things at once. So obviously in powerlifting, you have to concentrate on the commands and the lifting at the same time. So that was like a big worry for me not taking it. And then I guess the fourth thing is time management. So like doing powerlifting, it's not just the act of like going out and doing the lift, but you also need to like manage your time and be aware of like, okay, like it's this many minutes until we go out and all that jazz. Like now I need to do this warm up. Now I need to eat this food. So to not be on my medication, it did have a big effect. But I actually wasn't aware about TUEs until it was too late to apply for a TUE. Okay. It wasn't until I was talking to somebody else about who was going to be competing at AB Series, and I asked them, do they ever compete in the IPF? And they're like, no, I don't compete in the IPF because I'd have to pay all of this money for a TUE. And I was like trying to play it cool. So I just like Googled TUE and I was like, crap. Oh, and I was like, I bet you my medication is on this list because I know that people use stimulant medication, which is what ADHD medication is, to enhance performance in some instances. So I was like, oh my God. So I started looking up this list, still while texting this person, being like, oh, that's so interesting. Because it was really interesting. But I was freaking out. I was in the gym at the time. I was like actually doing deadlifts and I was like panicking. I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to take my medication. I was reading through the rules and I found that there's this thing called like a retrospective therapeutic use exemption. So there's 2 ways you can get a therapeutic use exemption. Either you can apply for it prospectively. Either way, it costs €100, which is very expensive. Not even including the doctor visit to get the TUE signed. You might even need 2 doctor visits. So it could end up costing you up to €220, depending on how expensive it is for you to visit your doctor. But yeah, so what was I saying? I've lost my train of thought. How ADHD is me.
Yeah. You were telling us about like, so you could get the retroactive one.
Oh, the retroactive versus, yeah. So I saw that you can get the prospective one.
Yeah.
Which is when you apply in advance, but I think it was something like it needs to be done at least 30 days before the competition.
Okay.
And when I found out, it was too late. And then I saw that you could get a retroactive one. And I was like, okay, that makes me really nervous because that seems kind of weird, but I guess I'll just go with this. I'll take my prescription with me on the day and I will just ask them like, hey, is this something I can definitely do? So on the day, I was feeling nervous about it. But I'm like, I'm like, no, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Get into the weigh-in room, and before I sign the anti-doping letter, which is like, do not take any performance-enhancing drugs, otherwise very bad things will happen. Obviously very anxiety-inducing when you're somebody who likes to, make sure that you're actually like following the rules properly. I asked like, okay, like I found out about needing a TUE. It was too late. So my coach and I decided that we would be able to do this retrospective one. What do you guys think of that? Is that a legit thing? Have we interpreted this correctly? And they were like, we would not advise that you do that because sometimes TUEs can be rejected.
Right.
Because if they decide that you don't actually like need your medication enough, yeah, they can do that.
Okay.
Because say for Ritalin, like or ADHD medication in general, you're not going to die if you don't take your ADHD medication. You're not going to get withdrawals or anything like that. You're just going to be adversely affected in all the ways I kind of described that it helps me. So like, it's not fair. It's like saying like, like you're not going to die if you lift without your glasses on, but you obviously perform a lot better with your glasses on,
Yeah, I would certainly query that, like the assumption of authority to tell people that they don't need their medication.
I suppose where it comes from, and like I'm playing the devil's advocate here, but I very much obviously I'm like on the side of like let people have their asthma inhalers without charging them €220. But yeah, so what was I going to say? Where that probably comes from is like there are a lot of drugs that can be prescribed as medication. So say for example, like TRT is one, and people could be like, no, I like really need this. But they might actually just be using it for athletic use. Now, obviously that I'm not saying that that's the case for like most people, and like the same thing about my medication. Somebody could be like, oh no, I really need this, but they're actually using it as a PED. So that's why they're able to, this in my limited understanding of this, because remember guys, I only learned about this like 6 months ago. But yeah, so yeah, that's why they have that there, because in theory, somebody like they could smell a rat and be like, no, you don't actually need that,
Yeah.
So
I can understand it to a degree, but I think it's bizarre that we live in a world where WADA require a TUE for you to take medication for ADHD or asthma, but there are people that use SARMs and testosterone, and they don't get popped for it. So yeah, look, suppose we live and we learn. At the very least, I suppose it was a very eye-opening experience for you. As you mentioned, it's helped you grow as a coach. You had to face this level of adversity and overcome it to re-fall in love with powerlifting essentially for what it is meant to be. And I suppose it's a good lesson in projecting the way things are going to be. I'd imagine you utilize visualization and things like that, like with what you expect on a day. I don't know about you, but like if I want to like hit like my third deadlift, I will think about what I'm expecting the weight to feel like. And I'm actually a fucker for like watching old clips of me like smoking big weights. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do
I'm
this.
so cool.
Yeah, straight up like, yeah, back when I had more hair. You know what I mean? But like, this is what I mean. I think it's a case of you can absolutely do that, but I suppose there's a case of where it can bite you in the ass if you're expecting a certain atmosphere and it's just not present, like it wasn't at IrishPF Last Chance.
Yeah, so I think what that really taught me was how to create that atmosphere for myself. And that's something I really worked on a lot during this prep was how to like manipulate my nervous system. Like as I'd said before, initially as a lifter, I struggled more with being anxious and needing to calm myself down. But as I got more experienced, I've actually been, and because I train on my own a lot, I've actually been struggling with my hypoarousal of my nervous system. So hyperarousal would be like too much nervous system activation, a lot of anxiety, like not in control. Whereas like hypoarousal is like having a nap while you're doing a heavy squat, which you obviously don't want.
Not on the platform on your opener anyway.
Not on the platform on your not ever, I don't think. I'm like, what situation would it be good to be having a nap doing a heavy squat? Like, tell me that, Ian. But yeah, so I think that for me, I realized the importance of not depending on the competition to give that to me and learning how to give it to myself. So I started to experiment with different techniques during training, and something I've been finding really helpful is the opposite of deep breathing. So deep breathing will calm your nervous system, whereas hyperventilation and learning how to make myself angry is something that I have worked really hard on. And I think that this transformation of needing to move from having the skills to calm myself to having the skills to make myself angry just goes to show how like non-linear your journey as an athlete can be in so many different ways. Like what you need in your first year in order to get better could be actually the polar opposite of what you need in your second year in some capacity in order to get better, which is what keeps it so interesting. That there's good, like I was actually talking to Shauna and she was saying like recently her butt's been lifting on bench, and I was like, it's so funny how you can have a problem.
Yeah.
Then you're like, I never thought that this problem would apply to me, but all of a sudden it's on my plate and now I just have to deal with it. And you could be like, oh God, that's so annoying. Like I missed a squat on depth. I've never missed a squat on depth before. Like you could be like, oh God, that's so annoying. Or you could be like, wow, another interesting problem for me to solve on my journey of self-improvement.
I think it's good as well to, like that you just mentioned, that was one of your squats in Scotland, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's some lessons you can only learn on the platform. It's actually, I have this like debate with other coaches where they think lifters should compete the least amount possible, like to build and build and build, then compete. Otherwise, it's like you're always testing and never building. I think the opposite. I don't think you need to necessarily peak to do a meet. And I think gathering meet experience is massively, massively valuable. Because like that, if your meets are so sparse, particularly in your first 2 years, you are going to project what you expect from yourself based on training. But no matter how hard you train, training will not be representative of what a platform day meet is like. It's a whole different beast. Like, as I'm sure you've learned many, many times now since, especially with Scotland. I think there was really, really good lessons there as well.
Yeah, I think that like being on the platform is just a totally different like kettle of fish. Like you have no idea what's going to happen. Like you have no idea like how like some judges will be stricter than others. I was actually talking to one of my lifters about this. He's really struggling with like being paranoid about his depth, and he sinks all of his squats. And what I was trying to say to him is like, look, you could sink every single squat and you might just get the strictest judge in the whole entire world, and you just still have to sink that squat that bit deeper.
Yep.
So this is the thing about the illusion of control and doing things perfectly, and competing shatters that, because it shows you that no matter how perfectly you do things, there can be still a spanner that's thrown in the works.
Yep.
And the whole reason competing is so character building is because it forces you to just deal with that thing. And there's no way around it. You just need to deal with that thing. Okay, this is just not going how I thought it was going to go. Like I'm getting like, I know you had an experience where like, you know, standards of depth were like very, very strong. And you just have to deal with that. Like people are just gonna have to sink their squats deeper. That's just competing.
Yeah, that was AB Series 12, Division 2 females. And all the girls I coach squat below parallel. Every single one. Like a couple of them training abs where you're never getting away with it. You know what I mean? You're always going to be called at squats higher just at parallel. So it was quite the stark experience. Like the experience was like being hit by a truck, because I was like, what the fuck? Why did they get red lighted?
Yeah.
And it's only as they went through the whole flight and loads of people were missing openers, I was like, okay, these guys want something that little bit extra. And again, it's to be a good coach is to manage that on the day and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's the game plan, and try and manage the lifters' expectations. Then one of my lifters got really, really upset. Like she was fine after she went on and had a good day, and she still got a squat PB in competition, a bench PB, and she had been having some deadlift troubles and had since now come back up with it. So things have gotten much, much better. But again, in the moment, like similar experience for yourself, you were projecting something that you couldn't account for on the day. Like you couldn't have known in your last chance prep you were going to get stung with this TUE information that you didn't know anything about, that that it was going to be a super cold venue with a super subdued crowd and very low music. And I suppose that kind of brings us on to a good section of the conversation I'd like to bring up, is that we wanted to talk a little bit about your experiences in the IrishPF versus AB series. And I think both of these things existing is really good, but they both present very, very different forms of powerlifting.
Yeah, so last time we talked about this a teeny bit in like the last podcast, and like I still do agree with what I said there. I think it's good that both flavors of powerlifting exist, but as I spent more time coaching and competing, I realized that I know what flavor I prefer. And that's not to say that the other flavor shouldn't exist and it's not great for some people, but for me personally, I am at the moment enjoying coaching and competing more in abs. There are a couple of reasons. So obviously we touched a lot on the atmosphere, and we've spoken a great length about like what we think the best look for powerlifting is, or what we enjoy powerlifting to look like. And the thing that drew me to powerlifting initially was the chaos. I think we all need some people need more chaos than others in life. And while I'm very orderly in some parts of my life, I love a bit of chaos. And that's what really drew me to abs, was just the idea of the excitement of it all, like the sheer excitement of the way they put on that show. So that's one thing that's huge for me in terms of just having an enjoyable day. The second thing for me, though, is the TUE. Originally, I used to think untested meets were basically just like a party for people on steroids, and I could come along to the party if I wanted to. But now I've realized it's totally different. It's something that kind of questions the whole idea of fairness in sport to begin with. Like, sports can never be truly fair because some people just have better genetics than others. And while I do think that there is like definitely a need for drug tested sports, I'm not saying we shouldn't have drug tested sports. It's often put on a pedestal as this inherent good, and we don't discuss the serious downsides that come with a tested sport, in terms of like the money that it sucks up, in terms of the stress that it puts on people who take substances for medical use, but that can't be used as PEDs, and then they have to worry about all of this extra admin, all of this extra cost, when they're already dealing with all the extra admin and cost that comes from having like a lifelong medical condition to begin with. So I think I've now started to think of it as, okay, this is a party for people on steroids, but it's also for a party for people who take any kind of medication that's bought a band, who don't want to have to do a bunch of stressful paperwork and pay a bunch of extra money, and they just want to show up and know that like no one's gonna make them piss in a cup and be like, why do you take medication? So then the third one that's come up for me, mostly actually as a coach more so than an athlete, because as an athlete, I don't mind fitting into a weight class. Like, I've worked a lot on my relationship with food, on my relationship with my body and the scales, to the point where now I actually nearly enjoy the challenge of manipulating my weight and trying to come in at a certain weight. I find that really gets the biochemistry nerd in me going. But for athletes, because I guess like I'm really into powerlifting coaching, but a subsection of my like coaching philosophy and skill set is helping people have like a better relationship with food and body. So that's, a lot of people would kind of come to me because they prefer my messaging around those things. They find it more inviting. And a big thing that I love about powerlifting is it helps people to see, okay, my body is not just what it looks like, it's what it can do. It's like, it's really freeing and empowering for people, but it's a double-edged sword to compete in a weight class sport, because on the flip side, it's also like hyper focused on your weight and weighing in at a certain weight. So for anyone who's kind of coming from that position, who has that struggle with the scales, I would highly, highly recommend that their first comp is something that is not weight classed. Because even though you can be like, oh, well, we'll just find a weight class that you comfortably fit into. What if you sit at 69? Yeah. Do you know? What if you sit at 69? You have to do something. Like, I had that with an athlete recently. We had like a lot of stress trying to get her to weigh in, because we'd been trying to get her to be like a light under 76, because we didn't want to do a cut. Like, that would involve learning a new skill set for her. And it was like too much, like being in prep, learning a new skill set. She had like other new things going on in her life. We decided it would be easy, because she'd been on a persistent bulk. We were like, let's just carry the bulk so that you just get that little bit over the line to like 71 kg and you can be a light under 76. Yeah. But then we found out that her scale was super inaccurate, because she stood on her friend's scale, and we're like, crap, you're like literally like 69 kilo. And she had to like force feed herself for like, and it was super stressful. Yeah. And like,
not ideal coming into a meet anyway.
Not ideal coming into a meet. And that's definitely the opposite of the experience that I would want somebody who has a challenging relationship with their body and the scales to have for their first powerlifting meet. I would significantly rather they did not have that distraction there. So I suppose in terms of comparing AB series and IPF, those are like 3 major plus sides I see to competing in abs. And that's not that I don't like the IPF. It's not that I don't see the benefit of what they're striving for, but I think it speaks the importance, like and I'd said this before, but I really feel it in my bones now, the importance of having diversity in terms of the kinds of competitions and conditions that are on offer in powerlifting, and that we don't want to actually be looking to homogenize powerlifting. We want to actually further diversify powerlifting as far as I'm concerned. I'd love to even see friendlies. That's something I know that's very soft to me, but like I'd love to even see comps that are like non-competitive comps with just good judging standards, basically parties to set PRs, and all kinds of stuff like that. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
But you raised some excellent points, and I know Ian Benson, when I had him on, raised some similar points. He was saying the reason he loves the way abs do things with the divisions. So obviously it's not decided by weight class or total, it's decided by dot score. So your division 2, you can come into division 2 and get promoted to division 1 and maybe with enough training get to pro-am. And everybody can do that, but not everybody can go to nationals.
I love that about abs. I love that I can set a goal with my athletes that's 100% dependent on them and their performance and not on other people. Because something like podium or something like going to nationals, yes, there's a big part of it that's you and how hard you work, but there's a huge part of that that's how, like, is there somebody up and coming who just comes out of nowhere? Like, you just can't guarantee that for somebody. So I love that idea that you can like earn your stripes and work your way up the rank and get an honor of being really good, but you don't need to like be the best. And while I think it's good for us to have competition for people to be adversarial, realistically, like the majority of people who compete in powerlifting are not going to be the best. They're not going to be the most competitive. So let's give them something that they can earn that makes them feel proud, without having to, you know, be like, I need to beat this other person.
Yeah. And I think that's the key thing about it, is you said it yourself. I know this has come up a couple of times, and I remember, I think I've said it on the podcast before, it was somebody asked Austin Baraki of Barbell Medicine in a Q&A, how long should a powerlifter be training before they make a national standard? And he was like, most powerlifters will never make a national standard because the national standard is very high. If people are in powerlifting, they should do it for their own self-satisfaction. And look, he had more to the answer, but still it was like, so I think it's if you can reframe what the goals are to be more about improving on a previous performance, or like, you know, some people do like, oh, new bodyweight PB or new squat person. Like your other lifts could have gone down, but your squat went up. I've had meets where I've literally PB'd one lift and I'm like, that was fucking great. That's perfect. I've had meets where I've gone backwards, but I still had a good time. So it doesn't matter. I think it depends on the person. But as I agree with you there, it's that like somebody might never get on a podium, even at an ab series, but they can make this has happened with Vinny. He has been on a podium one time, but he's gone from Division 2, got promoted to Division 1. This most recent competition for Vinny was all about staying in Division 1 after missing the standard at his previous meet. So he had his first 9 for 9 days since his first comp, PB'd all his lifts, stayed in his division, didn't get anywhere near the podium, but had a fucking great day.
I think that was a huge thing for me about Scotland, is like looking for the glass half full, not the glass half empty.
Yeah.
I missed a lot of my goals at Scotland, but I reached a lot of them also. I hit a DOTS PR, lightest body weight I'd ever weighed in at. First time ever competing internationally. Had an absolute ball, conducted myself in a way I was really proud of up until that last deadlift. Not proud of that in the slightest.
Completely out-angled James McLaughlin in that picture.
100%. I mean, I didn't think I was gonna, but I did. So sorry, James.
Sorry, James.
But yeah, so I think like you can, and deadlift PR as well, like comp deadlift PR. My total actually went down and my squat and my bench went down, but I got the most important thing for me out of that competition. I don't really ever think you should make the most important thing for you about a competition be any particular number. Because at that point, like you've really taken you've really given the control over your happiness to something you absolutely should not be giving the control over your happiness to.
Yeah, like I think the fact that you even came to Scotland, I think traveling for me in and of itself is a big deal. I think, you know, as you mentioned before, like where we were staying, the curtains weren't particularly good. You're a little bit of a light sensitive person, so your sleep wasn't great. You you made the decision very quick after coming and watching nationals. You were on the weight cut, so you came in lighter. And we're just there to have a good time. And I think we pulled that off really, really well. I had a great time handling everybody. So I thought it was fucking great fun. That was a really good competition. I agree with you on your last deadlift though. You absolutely could have made it.
Absolutely bottled it. But I think that goes to show like the psychological aspect of it.
Yeah.
What happened to me there was I got myself in that place that I've been getting myself into for deadlifts, which was really good. Like I was like an angry bull going out for that deadlift. So that was 10 out of 10 up until I got to the point where I was like, got those plates off the floor. And to me, my positioning just felt like my deadlifts felt at Last Chance when everything went to shit.
Okay.
And it just brought me back to that place in my head where I was like, I can't do it. There's no point. And because powerlifting happens in like a split second, like I just instinctively just gave up. And when I watched that video back, I was like, what the actual fuck did I do? Like, but that just goes to show like that there's so much more work to be done psychologically there, that I'm still carrying baggage from a bad competition before. But that's interesting work to be done. Like, I think that's oftentimes I think people think the difference between like really good powerlifters and new powerlifters is how strong they are, but it's not. It's the ability to battle the weight, and it's the ability to like not listen to your body's signal that like this is heavy and you should drop it. Yeah. Because like I still remember like how weights that when I look back at the videos, they were definitely like RP7. I used to think that was like RP10, but I had not trained myself to tolerate my body being under that much stress. So it's not even just that like we get stronger, it's that we get better at feeling confident and comfortable under these like terrifying loads that they actually overwhelm your nervous system. Like the proprioception of, I was saying this to another one of my lifters. He's always like, I've always said to him, like, I haven't seen you do a true 1RM squat yet, right? So, and it's happening now. He's starting to get closer to that because we've been pushing the singles for quite a while. And he's like, I felt something I never felt before in that squat. It felt so weird, like I couldn't sense my depth. And I was like, that's what happens. Like when you start to get to these weights that are actually truly like heavy, they are a different beast. They're a totally different beast. And the difference between like a seasoned powerlifter and a baby is a baby powerlifter.
Not an actual small child,
but a baby powerlifter is like, how do they react under that load? And I still have to remind myself that like, even though I'm not the strongest person in the world, but I'm reasonably strong, I'm still kind of like so new to powerlifting that like I'm still going to sometimes bottle it under those loads. And it'll be exciting to learn to tolerate them, because not just to say, oh, I hit this number. And that's what I was trying to say about like, don't make what you like most care about coming out of a competition a number. Make it how you conduct yourself. Make it your performance. And I think that aside from the deadlift, that was why I came out of Scotland so chuffed, was because I was focused. I was enjoying myself. I was grateful for every lift. I was grateful for every moment on the platform. And that was the goal I'd set myself, was how I conducted myself as a lifter, not any particular number. And that is something you're actually much more in control of.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your performance for that reason. I think that, like, you mentioned it yourself, every meet we can learn something more. So I think like that, this is probably just another notch in the learning towards how much more can I push myself. I think there was loads more in the deadlift if you had really just gone for it. But again, we can't know that until you try. But especially, like, I would always say to people, like, on your third deadlift, just go just whip your dick out and wave it around, because it's the last lift. It doesn't matter if you miss.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's a good lesson. I definitely think there's a monster pulling you in your next meet, you know. So especially if you get a bit more practice with the likes of a deadlift bar and things like that. But I had a good time. James got on really well as well. So did Katrina. I'll actually tell you a very interesting thing. Katrina messaged me after the meet and was, maybe we were talking in person actually. I can't remember. It's been like a week now. But she won Division 2.
Yeah.
But was unhappy with herself. She was like, oh, I feel like I didn't earn it, because she missed a couple of lifts. Because her first meet, she missed one lift, like, and this, she missed like one or two. And she's like, are you sure I won? Am I still a good lifter? And I was like, yes, you fucking won, you mad thing. Like, and I think it's that. It's like, it's weird I think if she had gone 9 for 9 and PB at all her lifts, she PB 2 of them, but I think if she PB at all of them and gone 9 for 9, she might have felt more satisfaction. It's so bizarre. Like, because, yeah, it's so bizarre what people see as a metric of success, you know? And I think that's really, really interesting. Like, for her especially, because she is obviously a brilliant, even though it's only her second meet, you can see the potentials there.
So much potential. Katrina's tank.
Yeah. But I think it was good. I think I enjoyed having the TUEs in the warm-up room as well. It was a good experience. It was such a bizarre experience in that warm-up room. It was just people everywhere. And I remember you guys were trying to warm up on the bar for squats, and there was just a guy sitting on a bench behind you, just sitting there.
Hey, what are you doing here? Get out. We were trying to warm up and there's people like standing behind me. I was like, I asked them to move. I was like, hey, can you move? I'm about to do my squat. And they were just like,
yeah.
it's fine.
Actually, while we're on it, I just want to shout, if you listen, Shay Ennis for being playing a blinder in the warm-up room, giving me a big dig out with loading the bars and all that, especially like when you and Katrina were like close enough to going out together. He was great to have on hand, and yeah, really appreciate him.
Takes a village.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. That is one thing I do love about Ab Series meets, is that all the coaches kind of help each other. Like my last meet, James was helping me. I had to lift one of my own lifters. Dale was in with me. Laura Vogelsang gave a bit of a dig out. There was so many people there just all helping each other out. And then at most IPF meets, Adam and his crew will help load bars, spot on racks and things like that. So it's good that there is that community element. But I just want to swing back around to, because we're still talking about the pros and the cons. I think like with IPF and abs, I think it's Ab Series is this, like I'll always say to people, it's like a rogue element sport. It's about the pump, the look, the event, the feel, it's like a metal concert. It's like being at a gig. One of the big key differences is, and this is something that Jay Farrant and I actually discussed way back in 2019, he was still laying out the Ab Series meets like an IPF, just the chairs with the aisle down the middle. I was like, we need to get rid of most of it. I actually wanted to get rid of all the chairs and just put in stand tables for people to lean on with a drink. And he liked the idea, but didn't want to get rid of all the chairs for like moms, dads, grands, things like that, you know? But I think if you look at an Ab Series, you'll see so many more people standing and moving and milling around. And I think when people are up and moving and watching, they're way more likely to cheer. It's like being at a seated concert versus being in the mosh pit. You know what I mean? And then I think the IrishPF obviously it's kind of dictated by what they do by the IPF. They're trying to present a much more like clinical, almost sterile environment that looks much more similar to what weightlifting is in the Olympics. So like you said, both flavors exist and is absolutely fine. But I think if you're in powerlifting strictly to enjoy it for what it is and get some fucking deadly looking pictures, you're going to want to go with that one.
I concur.
Yeah. But another interesting point you made is that it relieves the stress of having to make weight classes, which I think is a massive, massive deal. You work with the general public. I know you're really flourishing as a powerlifting coach, but you work with the general public a lot as well. And I think body image is a big, massive piece of why people actually come into this space. And you and I have talked a little bit about, it seems to be like an upsurge in the culture of, I think it probably stems off from bodybuilding, where people would do like bodybuilding preps. And like Shane Story did it, himself and his girlfriend Emma, they were on prep for show. So they did some photo shoots and they both looked fucking phenomenal. They're both very transparent about what they were actually prepping for. And this was just like a footnote on the journey. But now people sell photo shoot preps. And I know you've got some pretty strong opinions about it. So I'd like you to share those with me.
Yeah, so the photo shoot prep thing is something that like I have these like mental battles with myself. I'll literally just debate myself in my head and then I'll rope anyone who's willing to have the debate with me in person. And one that I've debated about a lot in my head is photo shoots, like whether or not I do like photo shoots. Myself, just as a personal challenge. I have got photos taken before. I think that I wanted to highlight that there's a big difference between the phenomena of the fitness photo shoot as a pseudo bodybuilding endeavor and just getting some photos taken for your brand.
100% sure.
Very, very different. But there is probably somewhere in the middle ground, and I'll kind of circle back around to that. But basically, the thing that I'm starting to take a bit of umbrage with is this phenomena of coaches doing these kind of bodybuilding prep style photo shoots where they get themselves very, very lean. They're taking like sometimes 16 weeks to prep for the photo shoot, which is like the length of like, I know that natural preps in bodybuilding are starting to get longer now. Yeah. They're talking more like 20 weeks. But I remember back in the day, like a lot of girls who did bikini, I would see them doing like 16 weeks. So it's a hefty amount of time to be dieting. If anyone has ever done a fat loss diet before, they will know that even 8 weeks can feel quite long. Have you ever dieted for 16 weeks? What's the longest you've dieted
I prepped for Last Chance from probably like late August into December, and I took like 2 weeks off for Christmas and then started back into it for nationals. I don't sit under 93 naturally. I sit like 95, 96, and I worked with Shane. Shane gave me a great dig out, kept me as full of food as I possibly could be while still seeing the weight come off on the scales. So probably not as acutely as the people that might be engaging in these sorts of things. But yeah, I've got my experiences with it.
So how long were you dieting for?
Probably, I think the longest time was September, October, November, probably like 12 weeks.
12 weeks, right? So,
Yeah.
and what was your total weight loss over that time?
I'd say I went from like 97.6 when I was a big L Pudner, down to like 92.
92. So like 5 kilo, 12 weeks.
Yeah.
That's pretty chill, right? I've done
super
like
chill, yeah.
4 kilo in like 10 weeks. It's chill enough. Like you don't feel like super hungry. Like some of these people are losing like 10 kilo over 16 weeks. And they're not like people who are not lean to begin with. You know, they're getting shredded.
Those are the people like Shane talked very openly about. By the time he was hitting, like he was in the like mid 90 kilos and very rapidly dropped to like the mid 80s. And he was like reporting like erectile dysfunction. And a couple of people I know have messaged me since the clips of that went up from that podcast a couple of months ago. They're like, there's something wrong there. He shouldn't be losing his libido that quick. And I'm like, yeah, but he very acutely dropped this weight super fast. So his body's going to compensate somewhere. This isn't a prolonged weight loss. He dropped weight pretty fast. So I think like 10 kilos over, what did you say, 10 weeks or something? More, less?
16 weeks. Like 16 weeks.
That's pretty damn fast.
Especially for females, like if you're going to be in a deficit for that long, like you're risking your period and stuff like that. So like people are putting themselves in compromising positions with their health, also with their mental health, like their relationship with food and body and all of this jazz, to get to these super lean body compositions. And then they're getting these photos and they're using these photos to market to Gen Pop. Now, I think there's a lot of nuance to this. If somebody's getting these photos and they're using them to market to like other people who want to do photo shoot prep, and they're being fully transparent about the risks of photo shoot prep, being like, you might develop a difficult relationship with food, you might lose your period, you're gonna have absolutely no life for like those last 8 weeks. Like I've heard some stories from girls who are doing it, like some of the coaches will like even get to the point where they're like telling them like a restricted list of foods, these are the only things you can eat, which is extremely unethical. As a personal trainer, you are not qualified to tell people, not even remotely qualified to tell people you can only eat these 20 foods or whatever. Like sometimes it's less foods than that from what I've heard. Having people on 12,000 calories, that kind of stuff. Not saying 12,000 calories, that's the demonized number of calories in the fitness. Sorry, I always add an extra zero. It's just the thing that I do.
12,000 sounds like a fucking challenge on YouTube.
That's my ADHD brain. It's just one of those little quirks. But anyway, so 1,200 calories. I know that's the demonized number. I've had clients on 1,200 calories. Some people are that small and that's actually not a big deficit for them, right?
Yeah.
So, but for a lot of these people, we're talking like active personal trainers with a lot of muscle mass doing like 15K steps a day, like 5 hard resistance training sessions. We're not talking about like a tiny 5'2" mum who's like really sedentary that you have on 1,200 calories. These are totally different scenarios, right? So they're doing these really extreme, unsustainable things to get to this body composition that they themselves are not able to maintain for longer than a week. Like immediately after, they're going out, they're eating, they're gaining like back weight reasonably rapidly after that. And they're using these images to market like transformations and like lifestyle change to general population clients. And I think that is exploitation and false advertising. I'm not saying you shouldn't do these photo shoots, but like don't use them all over your website that is marketing to Gen Pop. And I think it becomes a kind of race to the bottom type situation where you then feel that you have to go and do that in order to be competitive because, you know, it's getting like there's more and more of us out here. Everyone else is doing it. And if you look at these people's Instagrams, they're absolutely not maintaining these body compositions. So, and I know they're probably not saying to the clients explicitly, like, I will get you abs and you'll keep them forever. But the marketing implies that. There's this thing that I have, this gripe that I have with the fitness industry is that I think we're fooling ourselves about what we're actually marketing. We're pretending that we're marketing health and that we're marketing well-being, but in reality, we're marketing desirability, belonging, and the good life. And I don't think that having a six-pack actually gives people those things, but we know that that's what people think they're going to get if they get to this specific image. But if you look at the language, people are talking about like lifestyle change and like all these things. But if you look at the imagery that is being used, it's telling a totally different story. So there's this like incongruence, this cognitive dissonance in the way that we're marketing. And I really dislike it. I think it's wrong. I understand why people do it, but I think that we should be talking about this openly and we should be criticizing it.
For sure. I think there's like you mentioned, I think it's like this scale or this dial, and it depends on which direction you're pushing the needle, because I don't think there's necessarily a problem with somebody who it has an otherwise very healthy relationship with food, has an active enough lifestyle, and they're already in the sphere wanting to get some nice pictures of themselves taken, or whatever it might be, whatever they want to wear, whatever they want to do, or if they even want to wear anything, good for them. Then
most of them aren't wearing anything.
Good for you.
Which is fine.
You sexy bastards.
But
then you've got the other end of it though, like you said, where you're kind of, there's probably this element of predation on people's insecurities and what they think being healthy is. So you have your like general public who are seeing these images. And then if I go through that 8-12 week transformation, whatever it might be for this prep, I'm going to come out the other end like a Greek god, a supermodel. And I think actually, I can't remember if it was exact. I don't know if it was you that said it or if we had it in a conversation, but it's that there are people that exist that no matter how much body fat they lose, they could probably not sustainably and healthily maintain a six pack. Like them at their healthiest is not them with a six pack. So we have this like projected view that having six pack abs is being healthy when it may actually not be for everybody. It may not even be for the majority. And I would agree that I think we are telling people we're selling health and longevity and things like that and well-being. But what we're really selling is buy my product and you will have the aesthetic results that you desire. You know, take this magic plan that I'm selling.
And it's a lie because the cost of it for the average person in Gen Pop, aside, like if we are even taking out of the equation, like the health stuff, if we look at quality of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the lifestyle that a personal trainer has and how easy it is for them to maintain a certain level of leanness, that's a totally different situation to the lifestyle that people in Gen Pop have.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into this maybe later if we're going to talk about like obesity stigma and stuff like that.
I want to get into it. Stuff, yeah.
I think personal trainers are deluded when they think about what is realistic for the average person.
Mm-hmm.
We work on the gym floor if we're in-person PTs, so we're getting steps like for free all day. Or we're online coaches and we have full control over our schedules. We can be walking around answering. I know I'm on walks when I'm answering your WhatsApps or my clients' WhatsApps, so I can go out and do that.
Yep.
So it's really like 12K steps is nothing to a personal trainer.
Mm-hmm.
Like they would get 12K steps in their sleep.
Yeah.
12K steps to somebody with a desk job and who has maybe like kids or like responsibilities like that. Like it's hard to get some people in Gen Pop to get 7K steps. And in fact, like the health guidelines are actually that they're going to get the majority of the benefits when they get to 7 to 8K steps.
Yeah.
They don't even need to be hitting 10K. But 10K is like the minimum that most trainers are going to prescribe to people,
it's
right?
Just like it's like an arbitrary number, like 1,200 calories. It's just thrown out there. But I think you could say the same for like 8 hours sleep, whatever, an hour, 3 1-hour sessions of resistance training, or 5 1-hour sessions, whatever, my 590 minutes. People just pick arbitrary times and it's just this super top-down approach. Just fit this all into your life here, even though it's like crushing your social life or your personal life with your family or your professional life. It's not coming in from the bottom and saying, what can we add in? What needs to be adjusted? Is there anything we can take out? Is there anything we don't need? And I think that is probably a failing of the personal training or coaching industry in general. I don't think there is enough emphasis when people are qualifying, for example, on, fuck off MyFitnessPal, speak of the devil. There's not enough emphasis put on how we communicate with people and long-term change or lifestyle alteration that is meaningful to that individual. Because for some people, it might literally be if they're getting, like, let's just say hypothetically, like I could have a guy who's getting takeout every Saturday and we just say, well, we're going to stop getting the Domino's pizza, but I don't look at the implication that maybe he's divorced and that's the only day he sees his kids and they all have pizza together. So maybe we want to keep that in, but maybe there's something else we can do around this behavior that maybe he's, even small thing, maybe he drinks full sugar Coke and we're just going to swap that for Coke Zero. So he still has his experience. His kids still get time with their dad and they can still enjoy themselves. And we're not changing too much about the food environment because they're still having pizza. But maybe he says to himself, well, we're going to get the thin base instead of the full crust, or we're going to get the low fat cheese, whatever. These are all just really weird.
All great options. All great options. I would definitely recommend to clients.
But you obviously understand where I'm coming from. But I think it's coach, it's an example I used to Tristan in another podcast. When your only tool is a hammer, absolutely everything is a nail. So you only know how to get people in shape through one, you're trying to jam that square peg into the circle hole and push it in there because you've no other way about doing it. Well,
every coach, unfortunately, the majority of coaches these days want to get results in the fastest and most reliable way possible, often at the detriment to these other areas of the person's life, like you're describing, like their experiences, how embedded they are with their family, their community, all this kind of stuff. Like It's about like, how can I just get this person's body to change as quickly as possible without taking into account the whole person they are and all the things that they value. And when they say, actually, but what about this thing that I'm going to have to give up? We just say, well, you don't want it badly enough. Instead of saying, you're actually a complex human being with multiple different, often conflicting goals and values. How can I help you juggle these and also manage your expectations so that you understand that in order to honor your multiple different goals and values, we may need to take it a little bit more slowly in one of these areas. But that's not sexy. That doesn't sell. And I can't do that with like 100 people in my online group program really easily, because I'd almost have to treat people as individuals and think critically rather than forcing them into a cookie cutter system.
Hello, customer 41. What can I do for you? Yes. Your plan has been emailed. But no, I completely get what you're saying. It's monetizing people's desire to achieve what they assume is healthier, like, because that's the thing.
I actually don't think it's about healthying.
But I wonder if they think being more aesthetic is them being healthier.
I think that they probably think that to some extent, but I think the primary reason most people want it is because they think it's going to make them like more desirable, more popular, a better person. There is so much marketing that they've internalized their whole lives where the person who has the good life is the attractive one. And we I think health probably does come into it to some extent, but like, how many application forms do you think well, I get more that are centered around health, but I feel like a lot of people, it's just like wanting to feel a certain way. And I'm not saying like fat loss isn't going to help them feel that way, but it's not the only bit of work that needs to be done. And it matters how the fat loss is done, because if you run somebody ragged and you take away everything else that they love in the process of achieving that body is going to be a prison.
Yeah.
Whereas if you slowly work them towards being at a body composition that may feel more comfortable to them, while showing them how to do that in a way that honors their whole person and their whole self, it's going to be totally different. But I think that I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that people are signing up with us to improve their blood markers for the most part.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think I actually asked this to a relative before. So I said, if I had 2 pills in front of me, and one is you still feel as shit as you feel right now, but you look way better to everybody else, and the other one is you're going to feel amazing, but you're not going to see any major body composition change for the next 20 weeks, which one would you take? They still take the first one. They'll feel terrible, but look good. But like, I suppose there probably is an argument to make that people do get treated better if they're perceivably better looking.
But I suppose
that's like a more of a social narrative,
definitely more a social narrative, but I suppose like even if that is true, right? There's a ton of research that suggests that people who are perceived as being more attractive find it easier to get like promotions at work, like they get on better socially, like all this stuff. But there's a line where it tips over into being toxic and where people can become obsessive. And I think that that's why it's really important not just to assess like how much more like societally attractive am I getting from pursuing a certain thing, whether it be fat loss or whether it is surgery, which is really, really prevalent in personal training. But you also have to assess the cost. And you have to assess the cost of constantly chasing more, because like a lot of people, when it comes to appearance dissatisfaction, they won't just stop at changing one thing, then they're just like on to the next thing. Yeah. So that's why it really matters, how do we go about it and what are we telling ourselves about it when we're doing it, and who are we doing it for?
That's a very good point as well. And I would agree, and I think it's probably an incredibly complex thought process that brings someone to a place. They have to have gone through a lot and see themselves in such a certain way to want to subject themselves to extremely unsustainable diet and training regimes to look a certain way, let's say for a photo shoot, or to appease what they think is a societal norm. That's fair to say, I think. But I would also say is the trainers are probably very underqualified for it, right? And they're probably just copy and pasting what they're seeing other coaches do. But then where does personal responsibility come in for those people that want to buy into this? Because I think the internet proves one thing very much, is that access to information doesn't mean anybody's going to get any smarter, because people are still fucking stupid and we have everything we need to know at our fingertips. So I think what people are doing is they're saying, I don't want to know about the nitty gritty details. I'm going to pay you and you're going to get me my result.
Yeah, so the personal responsibility question is interesting. I think if we draw a parallel between this and medicine, because I think that what we're really seeing from the personal training industry now is like what medicine might have looked like pre-regulation.
Yeah.
Would you say the same thing to somebody? Like if somebody went to a bad plastic surgeon, I don't know if you've heard these kinds of crazy stories, but there's stories of like plastic surgeons or surgeons who are like trying to cut out like a lump in a woman's breast and they give her like a boob job she didn't ask for while she was in there.
No.
Absolutely horrible stuff. Like people doing, but that's
bizarre,
common.
yeah.
You hear all these horror stories of surgery that like people do surgeries on people they didn't ask for when they went in for something else. Would you say that was your personal responsibility, you should have known better? Or would you say like that person was in breach of their code as a medical practitioner because they said they should do no harm?
I would probably veer towards the latter, yeah.
So why are we putting that pressure on the general population when the general population gets like zero education in food and exercise? And like, you know, the average person like is of average intelligence and of average critical thinking skills. And like all of like, if you think of a realm that you don't know much about, me, I don't know anything about cars, right? When I go to buy my first car, I am at serious risk of being exploited. I will need to bring people who know about cars to protect me from that. And like that's kind of okay because it's a car, it's not my body. The reason we have such stringent protection and regulation around things like medicine and around things like, say, for example, the pharmaceutical industry and stuff like that is because it's your literal body, it's your life, it's your health. And we don't see at the moment like fitness as being medicine, but if we're actually to think about it in a little bit more of a curious or abstract way, you could actually position fitness as being preventative medicine.
I would agree.
And I think that part of the reason why we don't have the regulation that we probably need in the industry is because the government doesn't see fitness as that serious. Whereas if we were to see it as actually quite serious, because like a lot of the time we're dealing with people's health, their relationship with food, their mental health, like the amount of stuff your clients will tell you as a personal trainer. You're often like the front line when it comes to like the person who could potentially refer. So you're like the person who's most likely to notice like if somebody's having like outside the ordinary like signs and symptoms, like maybe they need to go get checked and there's something serious going on. That's why there needs to be like both us as a profession need to take ourselves more seriously in terms of the amount of responsibility that we hold, but also the government needs to take us more seriously, start giving us the funding, start giving us a regulatory body so that we can actually like link in, because at the moment we don't have link-ins like with other healthcare professionals the way we should. Like it should be like really easy. We should have referral networks to doctors. We should have referral networks to therapists. God damn, we need referral networks to therapists as personal trainers. Like every personal trainer knows that. We need a referral network to eating disorder clinicians. Like that infrastructure needs to be built out like so much so. I'm even losing the ability to speak. I'm so passionate about this. But I do think it would come at a cost if we did that. Like what's your opinions on regulation? What do you think the potential downsides could be?
I think it depends. So actually I've had this conversation with numerous other trainers, and I think we can all agree that the standards to enter into the fitness industry, where you are, as you mentioned, on the front line between the general public and their entry into what they would hope to be is whatever their motivations are, we would ideally see better health outcomes for them. Whatever their motivations are for being there, we want them to be healthier, happier, stronger, more capable people, right? Great. And the barrier to get in is probably extremely low, probably too low. Essentially, you can pay for your course, coast your way through it, pass your exams, because it's like the pass, you only need to get like 60% in an exam to pass. So as long as you're not a complete mong, you're going to pass, right? And now some people do fail, but I've said enough. Anyway, that's fine. So we could say the courses need to be more regulated. The standards need to be brought up. They need to be longer. We need to go into more detail, but it's who sets the standards? Because I attempted to upskill even further and attend Setanta College.
I've done Setanta College. I heard you guys talking about the first module.
The FMS. So if you are going to waste months of my time on something that is a completely useless, arbitrary barrier to people taking part in exercise, I do not have faith that anyone could accurately restructure the syllabus for what a good trainer could be, because they're going to put things in that do not belong there. And who agrees what those things are?
It would absolutely take the right person. And I think that's the double-edged sword that I really worry about there, is not just that bit about like who would decide the curriculum, but also like testing in and of itself. Test something other than the properties maybe that we're looking for. Like something I actually love about the personal training industry is that it is basically like a safe haven for people who are actually really emotionally intelligent and hardworking, but who are not good at school. how many people do you know who are like super intelligent, super on the ball in this business, who were absolutely shocking in school?
Ben Crockwell. But he does well, and he's like, he'll say himself, he's a big fucking mong. He did terribly in school, but he's good in this business. He knows what he's doing in this sphere.
I'd say it's most of us. Like, if you were to do a survey, I'd be so curious to do a survey of personal trainers. How many points do they get in the leaving cert?
Yeah, what do you think the average is?
I'd say the average is like definitely like in the 300s.
Interesting.
What do you think?
I'd agree.
And that obviously is not reflective of their intelligence and their work ethic. And well, what I would...
Go ahead.
What were you going to say?
I was saying, well, that's the point. School is literally a top-down approach. It's you must jump through our hoops and we'll deem if you're good or not. But like, you know, you could have 100 students and 92 of them are fine because they learn the same way. But you're going to have these 8 motherfuckers who, you know, either they're on the spectrum, maybe they're dyslexic, whatever it might be. They just learn differently. Doesn't mean they're any less intelligent. Doesn't mean their IQ is any higher or lower or their problem-solving ability is any less. They just don't learn through this ABC. It might be, you know, B, A, C, D, F, G, whatever way they learn, you know what I mean? And I think that's one of the downfalls of education. It presumes everyone should be learning the same way when in reality that isn't necessarily true.
Yeah, so like even if we were to have the perfect curriculum, then there's the problem of like, how do we test the curriculum? And like most academia, it tends to exclude those people who learn differently. And as we've kind of alluded to, a lot of those people are the best personal trainers. So you can make the argument that if you were to regulate personal training more, that, well, I don't know, I think that there's a flip side. There's another side of regulation that would definitely be a good idea to introduce that I'll get onto in a second. But in terms of like making it more regulated by creating a bigger barrier to entry, that's necessarily going to happen through testing. And testing is necessarily going to exclude some of the people who are the best personal trainers that we know. So I think that's a huge problem in terms of regulating it through making longer courses or harder courses. But the side that we could definitely introduce without excluding those people, I think, is having like much stricter rules on what we are and aren't allowed to do. And what is like considered to be like bad practice and what's not, because there's some shit that personal trainers be doing that like if you did that as a doctor, you'd be doing
some bad stuff out there, boys and girls. Like I think if we're looking at additions, I think the language we use is incredibly important. So we're not noceboing people or creating fear around a movement, a food, a macronutrient group. Not commenting on things that we know nothing about is probably a big one. If it was not expressly taught to you or you have not done any specific training in that particular thing, just shut your mouth. Don't talk about it. And then the other one is probably more it looking into the nuance of behavioral change over a very long period of time, because nobody flips a light switch. And like, for example, during COVID, there was this big talk about if more people took care of themselves, we'd be less impacted by the virus, right? So, and then there was this thing at the end of it, if people had just why didn't anyone take up training and diet? And it's like, okay, I can see what you're getting at. And it's not necessarily the wrong idea, but the implementation is wrong. Even if somebody had started dieting and training at the very start of COVID, the likelihood is by the end of the year and a half or whatever it was, they probably wouldn't have been that much more robust. They probably would have been a bit more robust, but probably not in hugely. If we're talking about somebody who was incredibly sedentary, very overweight, let's say, and that's 18 months of training, yeah, they probably would be healthier than then, but they would probably still be in that higher risk in subgroup. So I get what people mean, but I think there's too many people that I'm just spitting everywhere here. I think there's too many people that comment on health out, like we talked about, like photo shoot coaches. They have been lean their whole life. They've grown up in an environment where food was not scarce, food was available. They were educated more correctly in food, maybe a higher socioeconomic status. So the food availability they had to them, or the foods that were made available to them, were healthier, minimally processed, lower calorie foods that they would opt for more naturally. Maybe they were encouraged into sports much earlier on. Maybe they came from a 2-parent household where they could be taken to team sports and things like that. So there's so many other things that just came naturally to them in their adult life that, a lot of us, the plebs and powerlifting, didn't have growing up, you know what I mean? So I think that's the problem. We've too many people that have been in that position naturally their entire life, telling other people how they should get in shape, how they should be fit. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems in fitness, because that is one of the groups of people it attracts. And those, I think, if I'm not mistaken, will tend to be the coaches that lean more into the just move more and eat less, Richeal.
Yeah, I think that attitude is one of the most insidious things in the fitness industry, in my opinion. Like the sheer lack of compassion and empathy for the very people that you are meant to be trying to help is jarring. It's kind of like being a school teacher who hates children. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
They exist.
But they exist and they're the worst and they absolutely like ruin kids for the rest of their lives, do you know?
Yeah.
It's like, why are you a personal trainer if you lack compassion and empathy for people who struggle with health and fitness? I think it's so interesting because so many people get into this job because, as you said, like it was their natural path to be sporty, to be active, to eat well, because that was what they're passionate about growing up. But the people who actually need help from personal trainers are not the people like them who naturally find it easy. They're the people who didn't get good food education when they were growing up. They're the people who naturally have a higher food reward. Their brain literally just responds to food with more dopamine, so it's harder for them to stop overeating. They're the people who have never believed in themselves to exercise, who despise exercise because it feels, frankly, for some people humiliating. I know that's how sports felt for me when I was younger. I was never overweight, but I was extremely uncoordinated and sports felt humiliating to me. So I just developed an identity that like I hate sports.
Look at you now, you're an athlete.
And I coach athletes, which is like if you told my 12-year-old self like you would be making a living off coaching athletes, I'd be like, what the actual fuck are you talking about? Like, but I think that it's a really, really big problem that we don't have that empathy. And I think we're seeing it a lot with the backlash against obesity and medication. I know that you put up some interesting stories about that.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to actually, I don't know if by the time I release this podcast, I will have done it, but I didn't kind of give the conclusion to it because essentially I posted a series of replies that people posted about their opinion on different things to do with obesity or what their thoughts on obesity medication, or what we need as a society to like combat obesity. Because I think we can all agree that people that are obese would prefer to probably not be, right? Because regardless of like, right, this is completely cutting out the political and ideological view of like, you know, body composition. I'm talking strictly from a health metric standpoint. When people are very severely morbidly obese, their all-cause mortality is higher. So I'm sure we can agree that we would prefer, and I'm sure those people would prefer, to potentially not die younger due to this thing. And I'm sure, not saying it about their body composition, how they look or how they feel and how they look. We're ignoring that piece. I mean, strictly just as a metric of like overall health, all right? So, because again, we know body fat is this very different scale based on where you're from in the world, whether you're male or female, so many different variables, but we can agree on that. So one of the questions was, so essentially it boiled down to what people thought would help combat obesity. Some people had some pretty good takes. Some people had some fucking stupid takes. Like somebody essentially said it's basically their fault. They don't have to order the pizza. They don't have to drink the fizzy drink. Then other people are like, oh, I think it's more about education. Other people, it's a very simplistic view, but I think they need to find an activity they like and maybe counter calories. So again, people are going to look at it through the lens of what they do. And then naturally, one of the discussions was there's obesity medication that helps to combat as you mentioned, some people have bigger dopamine response to eating highly processed foods that are, or it's cause, or even if it's not, they would generally intake more rounds of high energy food because they have a big reward system built around it. So we know we've medication that can combat this, but it was an overwhelming number of people that were against the use of a medical intervention for people with obesity. So what I probably will do, if I have done it by now, then I've done it by now, I'm going to present people with these two scenarios, right? So we live in a world that has the food environment we currently have, which is easy access to super high palatability, super high calorie density, very low satiety foods. And we also have medication that people can take that can help offset the effects of being in that environment that very severely affects some people and doesn't affect other people, all right, as strongly. Then the other world is, right, we won't give them the obesity medication, but we have to regulate all foods. So high calorie density foods are greatly limited. They have massive laws around them, maybe massive taxes placed on them, and they're very hard to get. The problem is what most people want is, no, I want access to my fucking foods because I can handle being around them. And I don't want those motherfuckers to have the drugs because I want them to do it the hard way like I did. So these two things can't coexist.
I love that parallel scenario that you've drawn out there. I think that just really exemplifies what we're actually dealing with here, because it is not a level playing field. Like for somebody who has a naturally well-regulated appetite and medium to low food rewards, to live in the food environment that we live in is a totally different experience to somebody who does not have those things living in the food environment that we live in. I think that the way in which we think about the experiences of people in larger bodies is so one-dimensional and so ignorant. Like to begin with, like we don't even think about like how somebody might even get into that position to begin with. We just assume that it's just constant laziness. How many people do you know who are overweight but who have a PhD?
That's a very good point, yeah.
How many people do you know who are a CEO of a very successful company and are overweight?
There are many.
Many, right? So it's like, it's almost as though you could be disciplined at something and struggle in a particular avenue of life for reasons outside of your self-discipline. Or maybe you're just using up all of your self-discipline working really hard elsewhere. I think it's really funny as well that personal trainers, for all the reasons we were saying before, personal trainers can be really hard-working people, but struggle in school. So did they do badly in school because they're lazy?
That's a good
Would
point.
they say that? Or would they just say that I struggled in that environment?
I think, you know what I think a huge amount of it is with obesity? I think it's that people equate themselves maybe gaining some weight is the same thing a lot of the time when they're two completely different experiences. Like naturally I had many conversations with people who are dealing with obesity at the moment in my DMs during the course of this conversation. And that is one massive piece of it. It's that most people that are obese, like again, I know some of it's sensationalized on like Instagram or TikTok or whatever. Forget about that, the extreme end of the spectrum, and let's just look at everyday people who deal with this. The majority of them have tried exercise and diets at probably at various stages of their life. But the problem is, I think a lot of it is they're filtered into Slimming World, Weight Watchers, 8-week boot camps. You know what I mean? They're and it's almost like the boot camps in particular, in this particular example, was they were shouted at for being overweight. And I know that's what they were buying into because they bought into the boot camp and the whole selling point was, you know, get down and give me 20 maggot, you know what I mean? But they're essentially like reinforcing that I should be punished for being the way I am, even though I didn't ask for this necessarily. And in many cases, I think people are like grandfathered into it where like their parents were overweight, their parents were overweight, and now they're overweight and they're now an adult out in the world who they make their own money. They're surrounded by nice foods. They've always had this completely dysregulated, like you can eat whatever fuck you want when you were a little kid and it mattered a lot less. Now you're an adult and people are pointing fingers at you going, why aren't you fucking doing something about it? It's like, where do I even start here?
Yeah, I think what a lot of personal trainers get wrong is that we don't actually have difficulty with getting people to lose weight. We have a problem with getting people to maintain the weight that they've lost. That is in all the studies. That's what is shown to be the thing
relapse.
That people, the relapse, that's the actual problem. You can get people lose weight like in lots of different ways. And like most people who are overweight or who are struggling with obesity, they have at some point in their lives lost a significant amount of weight if we actually just look at the raw data. The problem is what happens after they lose the weight. And I think what a lot of personal trainers might say to that was, well, if they just did it better, they'd keep it off, right? But that's not realistic because let's look at like what the average person kind of goes through in a year of their life. Like, let's say you go through like a breakup, or like let's say that you lose your job or something really, really bad happens to you. If you're somebody who has naturally high food reward and who grew up in an environment where food was used as comfort and like you were kind of brought up on all those kinds of foods, so you have a lifetime of associations of comfort with hyperpalatable foods. When you're in that moment of darkness and you're really struggling, what is the coping mechanism that you have been like taught your whole life, but also that you are like hardwired in your brain to pursue due to having a higher food reward? It's hyperpalatable food. Whereas like for me, it's exercise. So how is that fair? You know, like how is that fair? So even if somebody has done everything right, they've put in the work to lose the weight, they may still find themselves in a position, because we all find ourselves in these difficult positions in life when we're feeling down and we need something to get us by. That food becomes that ping, and then they relapse and they have to do the work over and over again. And that's where obesity medication comes in, because if you can take something that's going to dampen your food reward, then when you go through that tough time, it puts you in a better position to be able to not turn to food. Whereas otherwise you are left totally vulnerable to how you were hardwired, and none of that is your responsibility.
Yeah, no, and it is exactly that. I think it's bizarre, like you mentioned earlier on, how coaches can understand they can do really well in one aspect of life, but maybe didn't do so great in school, or maybe don't have a great relationship with their folks. Let's just say some other aspect of their life they're not maxing out in, other than the gym. But I don't mean maxing out in the gym. You know what I mean? They're being a coach. They're doing great being a coach. but they can't understand. You've got maybe have a super hyper entrepreneurial business owner who just has no understanding of how to alter his exercise regime or her exercise regime or their relationship with the food. And as you mentioned, like that, I think that's a big case of it as well, is that if you are, like, you probably see it a lot with newer parents. They are so focused on their baby that their needs become secondary, you know? So maybe you'll see, that's the thing. It's like, you know, mom has the baby, dad gains the weight as well, because they're not focused on their own nutritional satisfaction right now. They're focused on get some quick food in and look after a child, because fucking child needs to have their nappy changed, whatever it might be. Child needs food at 4 a.m. for some reason. But you know what I'm saying? I think people forget that it happens to all of us, but there are people who, like you mentioned, have like deep-seated, maybe for many, many reasons, reward mechanisms around food, coping mechanisms around food. I knew a guy before in pro wrestling that didn't have any negative relationship with food, but anytime he had a fight with a girlfriend or his folks, he would go and get himself a pizza. So every time he had pizza, like if him and his friends are going somewhere with pizza, it would give him this like bad feeling. And it actually worked for him for a while. He was like, I'm not eating that shit, because it reminded him of being miserable and fucking teary and not feeling good. So just a bizarre, probably very much a bro science take, but that's what I mean. I think people need to understand you can form relationships with things, trauma around certain things, and that can absolutely affect how you interact with the world around you. You mentioned earlier on how on your third deadlift at Scotland, you just had that flash moment where it reminded you of how badly your deadlift went for you at Last Chance. And that maybe cost you your third attempt. And it's that people don't understand it. It's just these singular moments of decision making that can lead people over the course of many, many years to a place where they never chose to get there. And it's bizarre that we ridicule them for it. And to be honest, I do think most coaches would want to help people get healthier by whatever means that is, or more aesthetic, even if that's all it is to them. I just don't think they know how. I don't think they have the means to deal with the complexity of what the causes of obesity are. And it's multifactorial. Like, it's not just one thing a lot of the time. It's usually an awful lot. Like, I mean, they're not fundamentally wrong that, yes, these people probably do need to engage in some form of activity. They probably do need to regulate their diet, but the how they go about doing that is so much greater than what they actually need to do, and how they're going to do it over the course of not just the next 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 16 weeks, but the next 30, 40, 50 years of their life.
Yeah, I think all of this just comes down to control and like the illusion of control, like we were talking about earlier. I think these coaches, they probably want to feel like they're 100% in control of their client's result. And their protocol is definitely the one that's going to get them the result. And if there's something wrong in the mix there, it's the client and their lack of control. But maybe we're all just kind of helpless in a way. Like we're doing our best and we're trying in our best way to move towards the direction that we want. But there are things that are both outside the control of the coach and also outside of the person. And that's where medication comes in. It can level the playing field.
100%.
Because it doesn't, like, taking that medication doesn't mean that you don't have to do the work. It just puts you in a position where you can actually meaningfully do it.
It's like putting you back on a slightly more level playing field that the rest of the people are on. Like, it's just helping people out. But you know what one of the biggest pushbacks against the medication was? People are like, what about the side effects? Right? And now, some of the medications have side effects, right? But it's would you rather deal with the side effects of the medication in a much healthier body composition that will put you in a better position to work around so many other facets of your life, but also maybe manage a couple of side effects, versus having this person still be morbidly obese and potentially using 20 or 30 years after life? And I think it's which realm do you want to live in? I know for me personally, I'd much rather deal with side effects that are manageable in a legal and used medication that is prescribed to people, versus this thing that we all agree needs to have, we want something done, but we're not willing to regulate it through the use of medication, which is just weird to me. It's like denying somebody a high blood pressure statins for no reason. You just need to fucking deal with that, Richeal.
It's regressive, and I think it just goes to show what people really think of people in larger bodies. And I think we all really need to take a closer look at ourselves and evaluate our bias and all of the, I guess, the privileges of the position that we tend to be in as personal trainers, in terms of how easy that makes it for us to manage our health. We have peers who value managing our health. We are working in active jobs. We are financially incentivized to stay in shape. So our scenario is a markedly different scenario from most of the people that we'll deal with. And until we start to really acknowledge that as a profession, I don't think that we are putting ourselves in the position that we need to be in order to actually help people.
I'll actually give you a really, really, like, it's like one of those like little core memories. I was this back when I worked in FlyFit, and I was up near I don't know if you've ever been, you know, FlyFit has turnstiles. Ours was at like the second floor, and it was through a doorway, and there was like a barrier, and then the consultation tables. And I was leaning on the barrier, just waiting for people. I was on shift, so I was waiting if people needed any help coming through. And one of the PTs was sitting down with somebody for the first consultation. All right. And this was a lad PT, young guy. Again, he meant no harm. He was new to the job. He's sitting down with a large lady who was a bit older, wanted to lose a bit of weight. I'm after fucking ruining the story. She's a larger lady, right? And he sat her down and started filling out he had like a checklist he wanted to fill out. And he has like, you know, the box with goals, and he just ticked off fat loss. Because his presumption was fat loss. And she caught this, and she, you know, put on the reading glasses and leaned across and was like, I'm here to get stronger. I'm not here to lose fat.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Good for her. Because also, like, people don't owe other people fat loss. I think that there's this idea like, oh, well, like, you should want to be healthier. It's like, what if somebody actually just is not ready to do that just yet? Like, they don't owe that to anybody. And I don't really think that we pick on other groups of people for their own healthy habits quite as much as we pick on people who are overweight. I would also
hasten to say, and this is what I said to the guy after. He's like, "Oh, I shouldn't have done that." Now he knew he made a mistake, but he's like, "I just thought that was the thing. I thought you just want to lose a bit of fat and get a bit healthier." And I said, if she strength trains versus not strength training, and you change nothing else, she is going to be healthier.
Exactly, and that's what she's ready for. That's what she's ready for. Like,
and it's by taking the time maybe to establish a good degree of trust there, maybe in a couple of months you go, you know, I wouldn't mind some help with my diet and changing my habits around my food, or whatever way they'd vocalize it. Yeah, but needless to say, she didn't go to him for any sessions. He doesn't work in FlyFit anymore anyway. But yeah, that was I think for me, that was mentally a big turning point for like the whole obesity conversation. It was just the presumption that person's here to lose weight, you know, because I don't think it's necessary that is what everybody needs to do. It's whenever they want to do it and they're ready to do it. Like, and I know there'll be people listening, and there is massive like political elements to this, social elements to this, but we're talking strictly in the basis of how we serve people in the gym. I don't think we should project what we perceive to be the best. It'd be like me making somebody come in and deadlift because I deadlift, or I make them bench press because I bench press. You know what I mean? You don't have to do it that way. If they're just let them tell you what they want, and what means you are going to believe with them in a communicative effort to find the best route forward for them. Because if I went to somebody and I said, yeah, I want to lose some weight, they're like, no, you're fine. You can be that weight and we'll just build some muscle. I'd tell them to fuck off.
Let me just give you like another potential scenario just to encapsulate the bias that we have against people who are in larger bodies. Let's say if you had a lad come to you and he was like clearly juicing and like he was like, you didn't let him speak. Instead, first you were just like, yes, I suppose you're here to get off the gear. You know, it's like, it's unhealthy. Like, but we would never say that to somebody because like, there's just like, we wouldn't assume that he's unhappy with it.
Yeah.
We wouldn't assume that of him, you know?
Yeah, I think but that's the thing. I think it's the argument people like that, like, oh, but the medication has side effects. I think people say that, and it's true. Like, you know, obesity can cause more disease down the road. Also true. But do you say that to your mates when they go out and they're putting a bag of cocaine up their nose, when they're smoking, when they're vaping? It doesn't matter what people go out and engage in unhealthy activity all the time, and it's normal, it's fine. You know what I mean? So I think, yeah, I would agree. I think we have like an inherent bias, but I think some of that social, like it's been a evolutionary thing because we understood a lot less about this in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, into the 90s. And it's probably only in the last maybe 15 years that we're starting to learn a lot more, but like everything, there's lag. So I think the fact that there are coaches like yourself here that are having good conversations with people and encouraging them in this way, because I know that's your whole thing, it's empathy-driven coaching, that we have other ways and means to navigate, which is probably a fairly tumultuous time for these people. And like, not everybody that comes to us for coaching is necessarily obese or underweight or overweight. Like, I'm sure you're helping a lot of people realize how strong they can be with powerlifting. That's why powerlifting's so good. I know we didn't really get a chance. We'll wrap up now in a second. I know we didn't get a chance to touch off the macro counting and things like that, but that's another facet of it. I think coaches over-rely on the same tools over and over, and some of them are relied on because they are genuinely good tools. I get on fine with macro counting. I'm sure you do too, but that does not necessarily mean it's the right tool for the job for absolutely every single person.
Yeah, 100%. So I feel like the macro coaching thing that comes into the whole like personal trainers wanting these like really fast, reliable transformations, wanting to say, I can guarantee you'll lose dress size in 12 weeks or whatever, rather than thinking outside the box and being like, what's actually going to work well for this person. And for a lot of people, macro tracking is arduous and extremely unsuitable to their lifestyle. Like if somebody's eating a lot of communal meals, say if they have like a family or if they're like still living at home with their family, like those situations, like it just makes it really stressful. Or like say if they're like a businessman and they're living out on the road and they eat lots of meals out, you'd be much better served teaching them how to make good choices while eating out versus like being like, oh no, I don't know how to track this, you know?
Yeah.
And I think like the reason why macro coaching is always the assumed default, and this is not to say it's bad. Like I personally track macros a lot of the time because it helps me my athletic performance. I do it with some clients. I don't do it with other clients. I see what is the suitable tool to use based on the individual in front of me. The reason why coaches are absolutely obsessed with using it is because it's super time efficient. So it means that they can absolutely just like treat their coaching business like a farm for animals and just like farm out these transformations. It is like, it's just like, oh, another chicken.
Another sheep in line.
But yeah, so like that's one big reason they use it. Because doing other things can be more time consuming. It can require having a genuine back and forth with a human. It can require reading over a food diary instead of just like looking at a number and seeing that they hit their macros. So I think that the fact that coaches don't have this multiple tools in their toolbox is a sign of lazy coaching. And if we were to analogize it to coaching exercise, that becomes obvious pretty quickly. So say if somebody comes to you and they're like, I want to grow my quads. And you're like, cool, we're going to barbell squat. And it's like, they've got really long femurs. So they have to do this like super hingy kind of squat. It's really uncomfortable for them. They can't even get that much like knee bend going on.
Yeah.
And then you're just like, well, it's your fault that you can't squat. I guess you can't grow your quads.
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't do that. You'd be like, let's try the hack squat.
Yeah.
Let's try the leg press. Let's try the leg extension. And I think that that's kind of like the situation we're dealing with nutrition coaching at the moment, because macro coaching has become the assumed default and the only form of nutrition coaching that's on offer in many different services. And if you can't stick to it, that's just your problem. You're the problem as the client. Like we have kind of basically made excuses for lazy coaching.
And I think it swings back around to that. Like if we assume personal training courses are like assume somebody coming in knows almost nothing about the gym, maybe some of the blame could be placed there. But I am also a firm believer that as it currently stands, you getting your cert is just your foot in the door. The onus is on you to make sure you are in a position to best serve the people that you're going to work with. And if you are out of your depth, just refer people on. Like I've been in that position before. If something has been outside the scope of my ability to manage, I just don't do it. Like I've got a couple of clients that are working around like things like diabetes and things like that. I know some things, but a lot of the time I'll have them just work with a coach that knows a lot more about it nutritionally, and I'll just look after their programming. I think it's just the safest bet because I want them to be served to the best way they can be served, you know? And I think that's the key to it. Let me ask you one last thing and then I will let you live. We were talking earlier on about some of the photo shoot prep stuff. Some coaches undergo things like cosmetic surgery and things like that. And I know we've spoken about it before. I know you've debated whether or not to do things like photo shoots yourself. And I know you've mentioned some pressure to conform to certain standards. And I know this is, don't get me wrong, I do think this is prevalent on the male side of personal training because there is a certain aesthetic now that's really, really like obvious for most. Like you're very generic. I'm a fucking fly fit PT or whatever they might be. But I'm imagining that's significantly more on the female side.
I think it's getting a lot worse for men, if I'm being honest. But I guess I'm a female, so I can speak more to the experience as a female. It is bizarre how much being on the internet as a female in general, like as part of your profession and also being a personal trainer, can start to affect how you think you should present yourself. Like I have definitely noticed that I feel a lot more pressure towards like, say, maybe should I get lip filler? Should I get eyelash extensions? Should I wear makeup daily? All of which are things that I probably never really would have considered before encountering fitness as a profession. I think earlier on we spoke about like how we're selling this. We think we pretend we're selling health and well-being, but in reality we're selling the good life, desirability, status, all of these things. And a lot of personal trainers will talk about the pressure to be lean that they feel. But I think something that's very under-discussed, despite the fact that it's very obvious that people feel this pressure, is the prevalence of cosmetic alterations in the fitness industry, both on the male and on the female side. Like it is so much more common for personal trainers and people in the industry in general to have like things like veneers or lip filler, eyelash extensions, hair transplants, like all of this stuff, like on the male side, steroids obviously, but that comes more into body than face. I kind of want to touch on face because I think it exemplifies, or I think it proves the point that this is about much more than just health. A lot better than even like the pressure to be lean, because you could argue, well, oh, the general public thinks that lean equals healthy, so I need to project that in order to have authority. But I think the fact that you see so many cosmetic procedures and such a like upkeep of appearance in the fitness industry in general proves that the extent to which you're able to project a certain image has a huge impact on how profitable your business will likely be.
Right.
And as a result, a lot of people are feeling that pressure towards conformity. And it's something that, like, say sometimes I want to record a reel and I'm like, but I'm not wearing makeup.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And that will actually affect my ability to be spontaneous in my content creation. Like, and I don't know if you see this, but like most females are fully made up in all of their content pieces on Instagram.
Interesting. I don't like watch a lot of Instagram. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I post and usually I'll like read my DMs and then I might look at a couple of like stupid memes, but that's about it. But I do totally see what you're saying. See, this is one of those things that the reason I like these conversations because it teaches me, because this is not something I experience. I know there are guys that do experience it, but I don't experience it the same way. So, and especially from obviously I don't experience from the fucking female side. But do you think it's an issue specifically in fitness or just the internet in general? I think the internet in general exposes, like, if you're looking at somebody, if you're following a girl and she's like an influencer and she makes millions and she has a nice house, nice car, gets her hair done every day, has a beautician that works on her, like that is selling you an unrealistic standard to the average person that you're never going to achieve. But you think there is, because you're seeing it, your brain can't differentiate between this is not real, this is just how it's being presented to me? Or do you think this is like a thing that permeates all society now with the advent of Instagram and the internet in general?
I think all careers that are online and that involve showing your face a lot and like showing your lifestyle a lot, yeah, like beauty is a big part of that.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever read The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, but she talks about like display professions and like how there are certain professions in which like your appearance, it just makes up like a disproportionate part of like how successful you'll likely be relative to like the skills that are actually required of the profession. And I definitely think that that's the case for personal training, because a lot of the time you'll be more successful if you're putting up a certain appearance because people view you as aspirational. Mm-hmm. So it's not just like, and that comes into selling the dream of what it would mean to achieve a certain look.
Right.
So I was saying earlier, you said the example with the pills, like if you could take the pill that would make you look way better to everybody else, but you still feel shit, versus you could take the pill that would make you feel amazing, but you look exactly the same. A lot of people would take the pill where they feel shit, but they look amazing. Mm-hmm. I think that really goes down to like what we are trying to project, or like the narrative that's projected about what life would be like if you looked a certain way, that everyone would be nice to you and you'd have your pick of your partners and everything would be all okay. I think a lot of us are trying to put across this image of like what it would mean if you got in shape. And that's why all those cosmetic alterations are so prevalent, because they feed into that narrative and they reinforce it.
Oh, see, like now I really want to get into a conversation about like the culture around like selfies and people taking pictures of themselves and all, but we're almost out of time.
You're just going to have to invite me back.
Yeah, we'll have to do another one. I think it is excellent food for thought though, because like this is what I mean. Part of the idea for me with having the podcast is for me to learn more from other people as well, because like when I know this has been reported, people go on the internet or whatever it might be, on their phone now, fucking showing what a boomer I am. So people go on their phone, they go on Instagram or whatever, or Facebook, like Facebook, and they come away feeling worse about themselves than when they went on. I cannot say I can think of a time that that's ever actually happened to me. I like using the internet, but like, for example, one of my friends told me, so I started a TikTok when I got this podcast going off, and I just put my reels up there as well. My TikToks, I guess they are called on there. But like, I don't look at it. I don't read comments. The odd time I'll go in and just like a couple if people are like, they left like a nice comment or something, but I never ever pay attention to what's going on and how many likes it has, how many views it has. But my guy that makes my reels will text me and be like, oh, you're nearly at 1,000 TikTok followers. That means you'll be able to post a link in your bio. Oh, you've got like 14,000 views on that Instagram reel. That's really good. Or like 60,000 on this fucking TikTok. I'm like, great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think part of the problem is probably similar to powerlifting. When something has a numerical value, you always perceive the bigger number as better. And maybe the bigger number is better, but is it better than just doing the thing? Like, that's what I do the podcast for. Why I make the posts. I'm doing it because it's fun to do. I do it because I enjoy doing the thing. The result is, if no one listened to this, it wouldn't matter. They do, but it doesn't matter. It's something Dan and I talked quite a bit on before I started. It doesn't matter if I have 5 listeners or 50 listeners. I'm still going to do it because I like doing it. It so happens that people like to listen to it, but that's an indirect benefit to what the process is. And so it's interesting for me to hear how other people interact with social media, because I don't think I experience it exactly the same way. Like, one more point I'd make, and I'd absolutely love to get your thoughts and then we'll wrap it up, is people tell me I need to post on like a schedule, and that just sounds fucking stupid to me. Like, you know, you need to post a feed photo every day and 3 reels and 5 stories every day. Like, that's never going to happen.
So you want to know my opinion?
Just tell me what you think of everything I just said.
I think that this all just comes down to the control thing and doing things as a means to an end rather than doing them for the sake of it.
Right.
So I think like a lot of that, like, well, obviously if you want to grow your business, you should pay some attention to your social media, but this like optimization and focusing on like what formula exactly is going to get me to grow as quickly as possible, like all this kind of stuff, rather than thinking about, how can I be creative and enjoy making content so I don't burn out? And I think that's probably why you'll go quite far with your podcast, because you're doing it for the sake of it. And therefore you're not going to burn out. You're not going to lose the joy, and you'll improve it because you want to improve it, not because you feel you should.
I think it's going to go further because I can keep tricking people into coming in. I finally nailed Adam Phillips to a date, by the way.
Great. Can't wait to hear it.
But yeah, like, no, I completely agree. I think it's that. And I think people are so focused on the outcome. I need a big business with loads of followers and loads of clients, that firstly, they're not asking, can I handle it? Am I going to be able to deal with everything that comes with that? But also, am I going to learn at an appropriate rate to deal with this accelerated level of growth? Like, if I had all the clients and athletes now, if I had all those people back in 2017, I would have been completely out of my depth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm glad that I've taken things in steps and it's grown at a good rate over amount of time. I've never felt stagnant. I've always felt a form of upward progression. And I definitely feel that since starting this. So yeah, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for coming on once again. We'll have to do round 3 before the end of the year. See you next time.